Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's main stock index, the KOSPI, closes above 3,000 points for the first time. Investors looking to Democrat control of the U.S. Congress to lead to more economic stimulus. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un pledges to boost his regime's military strength, speaking at the Workers' Party Congress. The party's also working on new economic plans, Kim having acknowledged the failure of his policies in recent years. And in Seoul, the roads are still icy and cars are stranded after heavy snowfall last night. Public transport still disrupted too. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea continues to report fewer COVID-19 cases than it did in the recent peak, under 1,000 again today. But there continue to be cases of coronavirus variants, which are known to spread much faster. From tomorrow, all foreign nationals arriving at South Korean airports will have to submit a negative virus test result taken no earlier than 72 hours before they departed. Min Soo-kyun reports.
South Korea confirmed 870 new COVID-19 cases on Thursday, marking the third straight day with fewer than 1,000 infections. Of them, 833 were locally transmitted and 37 were from overseas. This brings the country's total caseload to nearly 67,000. The latest infections are mostly in the Greater Seoul area, with Gyeonggi-do province reporting the most at 294, followed closely by Seoul with 292. Cluster infections continue to spring up from long-term care facilities and detention centers. Over 1,000 cases are linked to Seoul's Dongbu Detention Center, and at several long-term care facilities, more than 40 people have tested positive. This includes 2 facilities in Seoul's Dongdaemun-gu and Yangcheon-gu districts. Health authorities plan to increase testing and monitor those facilities to prevent mass outbreaks. Concerns are also mounting over the new COVID-19 variants. South Korea has a total of 15 cases of new virus strains after 3 more of the UK variant were reported on Thursday.
We will continue to conduct further tests on COVID-19 infected patients from Britain and South Africa to detect the mutant virus, as well as implement tougher antivirus measures on overseas arrivals.
Starting Friday, all foreign nationals arriving in South Korea must submit a negative COVID-19 test result taken within 72 hours of their departure. This also applies to those entering the country through local ports from January 15th. Meanwhile, indoor sports facilities will be able to open again starting Friday, but entry is limited to 9 people at a time and to children and students only. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Wednesday was the second day of North Korea's 8th Workers' Party Congress, and Kim Jong-un having admitted that the regime's most recent economic plans have failed, the Congress is working on new plans for the next 5 years. Kim Da-mi has the details.
On the second day of the Workers' Party Congress on Wednesday, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed to promote peace for his people by strengthening defense. The North's state-run media reported on Thursday that in the previous day's session, Kim stressed that the North needed to raise defense capabilities to a much higher level. But the regime kept the details at a minimum, possibly to keep the door open to the international community.
The North had previously showed off its existence through provocative expressions like completing nuclear weapons. But this time it's mentioning national security and a peace environment, a strategic move to avoid antagonizing the U.S. and the international community.
In his opening address on Tuesday, Kim Jong-un admitted that the regime's economy had immensely underachieved over the past 5 years.
We have to make sure those painful lessons don't repeat themselves. We have to boldly admit there were flaws that became obstacles, and we must establish firm countermeasures so that they are not repeated.
Following that rare admission, Day 2 was about establishing specific plans and goals for economic development over the next 5 years. The session covered an analysis of the main economic areas, including construction, transport, and commerce.
The North already has strong defense capabilities. Now it's created a security environment, it's time to focus on economic development. Kim Jong-un is asking and accepting ideas from members of the Presidium and setting realistic goals so that there can be economic gains that improve people's lives.
Wednesday's session on rebuilding the economy continues on into Thursday. Eyes are now on whether the North will send a message to Seoul and Washington in the coming days. Experts comment that the Congress could last throughout the weekend, highlighting the significance of the event. The previous Congress back in 2016 took place for 4 days. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
It's just about the coldest it's been all winter today in South Korea, and that's making it hard to clean up from the snow last night that stranded drivers all across the country. The remaining snow is still causing accidents on the roads and disrupting public transport. Jong-un reports.
A massive snowstorm on Wednesday night brought chaos to roads and highways across the capital area, leaving cars stranded and abandoned overnight on icy streets. This led to high congestion on Thursday's morning commute. Temperatures as low as -17°C meant roads were frozen, causing collisions on city highways. It also forced cars to limit their speeds to under 20 km/h. From 7 a.m., usually still relatively quite ahead of the peak of the morning commute, subway stations were already packed with people heading to work early. However, there were incidents where passengers had to be evacuated from trains as a cold wave had frozen railroad switch points, stopping several trains.
The subway didn't move for about an hour and a half, and I tried to get on the train at Seongsin Women's University Station, but I had to let 7 or 8 trains pass because they were already packed. By the time I got on the train, there were some 50 people waiting behind me on the platform.
As a countermeasure, Prime Minister Jong Se-kyun asked civil servants to adjust their working hours. Jong also promised a thorough snow removal operation throughout the day to make sure there's less traffic disruption this evening. Expecting more people to take public transport, Seoul City also increased the number of buses running in the morning and extended peak subway services. Some 15,000 people were deployed last night to remove snow, but parts of cities still have up to 4 centimeters. Choi Jong-un, Arirang News.
South Korea's benchmark stock index, the KOSPI, broke through 3,000 points briefly during Wednesday's session, and today it closed above that mark for the first time. The KOSPI on Thursday added more than 2% to close at almost 3,032. Earlier in the day, it set a new intra-session high of 3,055. The tech-heavy KOSDAQ closed at just under 989 for a gain of 0.75%. The gains in Seoul follow a big rise on Wall Street overnight, fueled by optimism that the Democrats taking the Senate means more economic stimulus. President Moon Jae-in has again praised the South Korean people for their cooperation in the battle against COVID-19. Their collective effort, he said Thursday, has dampened its economic impact. President Moon said 2021 should be about cementing South Korea's position as one of the world's leading countries.
이제 우리는 한국판 유지의 본격적인 실행으로 빠르고 강한 경제 회복을 이루고 선도국가로 도약할 것입니다. 또한 2050 탄소 중립 정책으로 세계와 함께 기후변화 대응을 이끌어 나갈 것입니다.
President Moon added that if the situation allows, he'll continue to work on improving inter-Korean relations to achieve lasting peace on the Korean peninsula. The South Korean conglomerate SK Group has announced that it's going to invest $1.5 billion to acquire a stake in the American fuel cell maker Plug Power as it looks to expand its hydrogen energy business. With SK taking a 9.9% stake in Plug Power, they're forming a strategic partnership to provide hydrogen fuel cell systems, fueling stations, and more to the Asian market. They expect to close on the deal in the first quarter. South Korea has made hydrogen a major part of its Green New Deal initiative, and Hyundai Motor reports said this week is planning to build a new hydrogen fuel cell plant in China by the end of the year. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, looking forward to an economic recovery. Some are saying that it's not going to be balanced and occurring at different rates in different countries and different sectors. So this gap between the advanced and developing countries could be a hindrance to the recovery overall. Professor, what's causing this imbalance? And tell us about the overall situation.
whenever economic crisis comes, the behaviors of employers change dramatically. To survive under a crisis, they minimize operating costs by laying off workers. So the economical weak, like females, young workers, and less skilled workers are targets of these layoffs. And this makes the income gap between high income and low income much larger over a crisis. This relationship is exactly applied to international community between rich country and not rich countries. So we need to pay attention on these unbalanced income gaps between rich country and not rich country, because that can delay global economic recovery after the end of coronavirus pandemic.
The big story of the day, stocks in New York mixed overnight. Investors considering what it'll mean if the Democrats control both the White House and Congress. The Dow reaching a new intra-session high and a record high close. What's the story in the global markets?
First of all, the blue wave is good news to U.S. Stock market because President-elect Biden and Democratic Party will implement aggressive fiscal expansion without hesitation. But U.S. market was mixed between Dow Jones and NASDAQ yesterday. Dow Jones industry increased by 1.4%, but NASDAQ dropped by 0.6% yesterday. High-tech stocks in NASDAQ decreased mainly due to disappointing performances of companies. Other major markets, including London, Paris, Frankfurt, and Tokyo, all gained over 1% yesterday by positive signs from U.S. Democratic Party's victory in Senate.
And today, the KOSPI surging again, well above 3,000 points. This is a new all-time high at the close. Some say the market's overheated, others saying there's room to go higher. What do you say, Professor?
There was a huge gain in KOSPI with 2.1% daily return. And also, KOSPI passed the 3,000 level for the first time in history. The rise of KOSPI was led by domestic institutional investors purchase while individuals sold stock today. In Kosdaq market, domestic individual investors bought stocks, but institutional investors sold the stock. Kosdaq was closed with 0.8% return today. Actually, both of chairman of Bank of Korea and Minister of Treasury are warning against increasing gap between stock market and real economic activities. This unbalanced situation between stock market and real sector can't be maintained forever.
And now in December, Korea's exports increased by a double-digit percentage for the first time in over 2 years. Also the first time in over 2 years that monthly exports have exceeded $50 billion. So there's a lot of anticipation about a good year ahead for exports. What do you say, Professor?
Export increase is such a great news to Korean economic recovery because Korea is one of the most foreign-dependent countries in the world. Actually, Korean export began to pick up from last September, and after that, export has maintained uptrend until December. Particularly in November, export grew by 7%, and in December by 12%. Korean export was led by major export items like memory chips, automobiles, displays, and so on. And these major export items grew in 2 digits over 2 months.
Now, last year, Korea's population shrank for the first time, deaths outnumbering births as people had fewer babies. This was expected to happen at some point, but it happened 9 years sooner than the government had forecast. Why is that, and what can be done about it?
I would say that a declining population has a larger impact on Korean economy than that of COVID pandemic in the long run. Korea's population has started to dwindle as childbirth in 2020 declined by 10.7% on yearly basis, while death increased 3%. So the country has toppled over so-called demographic cliff when the number of people who die surpasses the number of newborns. Particularly, COVID pandemic is negatively associated with new marriage and childbirth. So there could be more decline of population if COVID pandemic continues.
All right, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights, as always.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.